Good morning and welcome. I hope everyone is, I guess we can't say is having a great Tableau conference. Kind of we're at the point where it's kind of I hope everybody had a great Tableau conference. We're really coming to the end here. I really compliment you on staying awake on the last day for the last meeting here. That's pretty impressive. So yeah, again, welcome to our session. And I'd like to start us off with a story if I could. And Tableau's been my work home for going on the past 6 years, and very early on, so about 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a large financial services company that provided retirement planning services, 401k plans, etc., to a very large tech company based in Silicon Valley, both of these being very prominent in their field. And while the customer really liked the financial services, they had one concern. And that was when they went to their customer portal, they found it very difficult to see and understand all the critical data about rate of employee participation, contribution rates, investment returns, et cetera. And they shared this feedback with the financial services company. And there's a little bit more tension in this story because they were actually open to the idea of looking for an alternative supplier of those services based on how useful the portal was to them. So clearly a challenge, something that needs to be addressed. Well, we're all pretty smart folks in this room, at least you folks are, I'm sure. So let's try to take on this challenge as a team. So trick question. They're having difficulty seeing and understanding data. Can anybody think of a tool or technology that would help people see and understand their data? What?
Tableau.
Yay, exactly. Man, I wish I had a t-shirt to throw your way. Exactly. So it sounds like we probably just solved the problem. It turns out that this financial services company was in fact a very sophisticated Tableau user. They had been going down the path of becoming data-driven for a number of years. And actually, the customer was actually a very, very large Tableau user. So it sounds like what we could do is we could take Tableau server and point it out to the internet. Then the financial services company could call up their customer and say, hey, here's the URL for the Tableau server. I'll give you your username and password. No, it's not the same as the one you log into the customer portal. Yes, you'll have to leave the customer portal to go over to the Tableau server. And when you get there, there are dozens of visits, and so just kind of click through them and see which one it was you think you're interested in, and problem solved, right? Maybe not. Maybe that's not the best approach. Well, here's what this financial services company did. They created, and goodness, look at the title of this session. They built a custom Tableau portal. Now, they didn't necessarily do it in 60 minutes. Worked with them over a period of time to build out one of the, at that time, one of the largest deployments of Tableau. They created some very compelling visualizations. They elegantly and seamlessly integrated them into their existing portal, and they went beyond pleasing their tech company client in the end. They literally wowed them. And they cemented that relationship and were able to take what they had created and share that naturally with all of their other clients, thereby upping their game and their value, not just with one customer, but with all of their customers. So here's a company that was really ahead of their time in terms of becoming data-driven internally. They were also ahead of their time when it comes to becoming data-driven externally, if you will, customer-facing, partner-facing, supplier-facing analytics. And today, that is one of the most dominant trends in our space. And that is becoming data-driven externally, sharing the data that we have beyond our firewall, doing it visually, using Tableau, but of course not just putting Tableau out there on the internet, elegantly weaving them into existing or new portals and creating very rich functionality around them. And I'm assuming that you're all here today because you'd be interested in doing something like that at your organization, which is just fantastic. So that's what we're going to do. By the way, in terms of just names and titles and so forth, I'm Gordon. This is my partner in crime, Reed. We are both sales consultants on what is known as the Embedded Analytics team here at Tableau. We're both kind of long-termers here at Tableau, been around for a little bit. And we're going to take you through this journey of building a custom portal in 60 minutes, or actually a little less. We are naturally part of the developer track. I hope you've taken in some of the other really incredible sessions. This, of course, is the repeat, so there is no subsequent screening, if you will, of this movie. But as you probably know, this is going to be recorded, and it will be available to you if you want to go back and review any parts of it when you're back home. And again, too, most of these sessions have already run, but I hope that you did take in, again, a few of the other really outstanding sessions in the embedding track. And let's dive in. So what is a Tableau portal? I think we kind of talked about it. Let's look at some examples, though, to kind of help really make sure it's very clear. For instance, the city of Boston says that they use data to manage their city. And when they want to share that with constituents, they do it through embedded Tableau analytics in the City of Boston portal. So there's an example of a Tableau portal. Now, many of the folks that Reed and I work with are businesses that build, their entire offering is built around Tableau. Their entire offering is data. And they naturally use Tableau in an embedded portal to sell that. It's a product in many cases. Sometimes a custom Tableau portal is actually a product. And then, and I'm going to switch over here to this other computer. 2, 3, 4. Did I press the right button? Oh, yeah, except that wasn't. My computer had just kind of gone to sleep a little bit. Okay. When Reed and I, when anybody joins the embedded analytics team at Tableau, you have to build a complete custom portal. That means choose a web server technology. Could be IIS and choose a language. Could be C#, or it could be Tomcat and Java, or it could be something and Ruby, or it could be Python. We're technology agnostic. You can use your choice of a web technology to build a custom Tableau portal. And we're going to spend some time taking a look at this one, the manufacturing portal. I'll briefly also show you the hospital health portal. Bear in mind, these are portals for fictitious companies. We built these internally to provide our customers with examples of what we like to call the art of the possible. And we're also going to use it to just, again, nail down this idea of what is a custom Tableau portal? What can you do when you're building one? What are the possibilities? And that's what we want to make clear, as well as, of course, how you actually do it. And that'll be the bulk of our session here today. So this is a portal for a company called Industrix. It's a manufacturing company, and something of concern to their customers would be naturally things like manufacturing defects and things of that nature that we would need to track and visually share. So we do that as Industrix employees for the time being through this Industrix portal. Now, like any enterprise application, it's secure. We have to authenticate to it. So if we go to the self-service analytics menu here, it says, well, you have to be logged in. You can't just drop by unless you're an authenticated user. So how about if we start off our journey through this portal by logging in? And here we'll log in as Joe. He happens to be a manager, by the way. And when Joe logs in, you might already be thinking, we're going to view some Tableau analytics. Is Joe going to have to log in again to Tableau? Because that would not be the ideal customer experience. Hopefully we can achieve single sign-on. That's going to be one of the key technologies we talk about, is how do you orchestrate single sign-on between your web application and Tableau server so that the path to Tableau analytics is absolutely seamless for the visitors or the consumers of your portal. Also, how do people discover the analytics that are available to them? We should make that convenient. We should make that delightful as well. Now, it turns out Joe's authenticated, so he can go to the self-service analytics page here, and wow, he gets a little thumbnail of all of the visualizations that he has permission to see. A very friendly way. I mean, after all, we can select visually exactly which one it is we want to see. Now, that's just one way. You could potentially expose the content that a user has access to. We just happen to use thumbnails. I'll talk about how that gets done using the Tableau REST API. That's the second really big technology component we'll be talking about today. So far we have SSO, and we have the Tableau REST API. And then when we click through, this is, of course, what we're really after. That's the embedded visualization. So let me just describe what's going on here briefly and then show you some of the things that we chose as Industrix developers to do in this portal using the Tableau JavaScript API. And that's the third and last really key technology component that you'll use to build a custom portal. So first of all, just let me point out, or probably don't even need to point out, you can easily see that the integration is seamless. You don't see where the Industrix site begins and ends and where the Tableau viz begins and ends. You also don't see the Tableau name or logo anywhere, do you? And in a custom Tableau portal, you can integrate it so transparently that for all intents and purposes, nobody really even needs to know that Tableau is part of the technology stack. They could just think you guys are really, really incredible developers because you can build these vizzes that look just like great Tableau vizzes. You know, take all the credit, feel free, because you don't really have to say that Tableau is even in the mix here. So we can, and obviously it is very much a part of the portal. In fact, you'll notice these colors here, not good with color names, this kind of bluish, greenish, and brown. If we were to go back to the home page of Industrix, there are those same colors there. Those are the Industrix colors, sure. Why don't we weave the colors that represent our company into the visualizations and make the integration even more seamless and transparent? And then what can you do with that embedded viz? Well, it's a Tableau viz, so absolutely the user can interact with it just as you normally would be able to. But we can go beyond that as far as the experience we provide because we have this really cool JavaScript API that lets us build stuff around the viz. And Reed's going to talk about that in detail later. And let me just take a second to tell you how that is woven in here. Across the top, at the very top where you have home, services, blog, etc., that's the standard Industrix menu bar. The next row of buttons there were also created by the Industrix web developer. They don't come from Tableau, but what they do is they trigger certain calls to parts of the Tableau JavaScript API. Or we'll see they may pop up a little form that the user would interact with before then clicking a button that in turn triggers the JavaScript API to deliver some functionality to the end user. This is the cool part. Let me show you some really trivial examples. Let's say we select regional, we just click on something. It's a Tableau viz. Obviously, we've got an action filter because there are two sheets here. And we could, just in a very trivial way, put the JavaScript call behind this button to clear selections so that when we click on it, we control the viz. When you embed a Tableau visualization, if you're at all a developer, and you don't have to be to follow this session at all, but you could think of it as a programmable JavaScript object. So now you can start sending commands to that viz, telling it what to do. We could tell, this is again a trivial example, want to keep the first couple things here simple. We can trigger the export to PDF dialog box. Okay. How about the export worksheet data? What would that be? Well, Tableau has this cool Tableau API call known as getData. And you can use it in the JavaScript API to get summary data. You can even use it to get the underlying data. There are probably some practical limitations around getting the underlying data if it's millions of rows, and we're going to try to put that all in the browser memory. But you can request all of the data that was used to derive this viz, if you so choose. Now, what we're doing here as Industrix web developers, so if you put yourself in the shoes of someone building this site, you say, I'd like to have this getData API available to my users. In fact, how many people ever hear from your Tableau users, I'd like to get the actual data from the viz so that I can put it in Excel, create my own pivot table. Excel's not going anywhere. As beautiful as a tool as Tableau is, people often just want that data so they can go somewhere else with it. So we decided to build a little form for our users here. But notice that there is a drop-down here that shows the user, lets the user select which of the two sheets they want the data for. Did we have to hard code that? Not at all. We use the JavaScript API to discover at runtime what are the sheets on the viz that the user just pulled up. Let's pop that into a little drop-down list there. Let the user make a selection, and when that user clicks submit, we'll wrap up the data as a CSV, and boom, they don't have to send a request to the help desk anymore for the data behind that. How about some other cool things? Again, we can also discover if multiple sheets have been published together in a workbook, and we can just dynamically pop a button on there to let the user navigate back and forth. And this might not be something that you thought you could do in a Tableau portal, but we can actually take Tableau's web authoring functionality and drop it right into our portal. So this is an incredibly powerful capability if you think about it, because what we're doing here is we're basically handing the user, your customer, if you so choose, because of course it's permission driven, you don't have to expose web editing, but here we are, we haven't left the portal, we have that really clean look and feel still, and we could, let's say, just for giggles, maybe your customer calls you up and they say, you know, on that regional defect sheet, and you sort of show the defects by site, east, north, south, and so forth, we would like to see it by defect category. Well, if you enable web authoring, say, hey, you can do it. You don't need to call us. You can be entirely self-sufficient. That Tableau value proposition of self-service can carry right on through. Okay, so just a couple of more quick examples. I'm going to go back to the self-service analytics menu. Going to pop into this viz. And the reason for doing that is another neat capability about embedded Tableau is you can match it up with other things in the web application, say even other visualizations. Over on the left here, you see something created in D3. That's a really popular JavaScript library for creating vizzes. And it does some things that kind of are a little bit more specialized. So we created a D3 viz on the left, and we have a Tableau viz on the right. Now, because that Tableau viz can be told what to do, when we click, say, on east here, wow, the Tableau viz responds. So we're filtering the viz dynamically based on interaction with this D3 viz over here on the left. One more example use case. And again, this is just the art of the possible. We just grabbed a few use cases to implement here. You're in no way, shape, or form obligated to do the same things, and you're not limited to these use cases at all. As you'll see, the JavaScript API is quite powerful. We said that we could control the viz. We can also have the viz tell us when the user is interacting. It's actually a two-way communication that we have with this. So in just very trivial terms, we might select here 4 of these marks. And in Tableau terms, a mark is just always a visual element of a viz. And notice that somehow we knew that the user selected 4 orders, and we got data for those. So we could tell them what the average was across all the 4 items that they selected. In other words, we not only get notified that the user's interacting, but we get a bunch of data back. And we can do things with that data. This is trivial. We just put it up there so you could see that this actually worked. But imagine being able to take those 4 marks and the data behind them and send it off to some other part of the application. Maybe use it to drive something else going on in the portal. And we can even go so far as to, this is an example where we might use the JavaScript API along with a little bit of back-end code to implement writeback. That's another common request. And by the way, did everybody see the writeback API, desktop extension example? So this would be another way to skin that cat. Now that we have desktop extensions, you can actually build writeback directly into the viz, or into the dashboard, of course. But here's a way you could also do it in the hosting web application. So again, Tableau is not, this is our Industrix developers leveraging Tableau technology to implement writeback. Tableau never itself does writebacks to data. We have a contract that will always only ourselves be read-only with respect to your data. So you're never at any risk pointing Tableau to data in terms of potentially overwriting it or modifying it. But sometimes people want to write back. And so what we'll do is we'll take this particular order, 8107. Notice that our order ID now is 7693. And how did we get this list anyway of all the marks on there? Oh, of course, the JavaScript API. We were able to dynamically read at runtime, find out what's on that viz, and then build a little bit of a select list here. And again, we know when a user clicks on something. So if we click on 8107 here, notice what happens. It updates. So we're using the viz to control the app. Now let's change this to, let's multiply that value by 10 and click submit. And watch what happens to the viz. So when we click submit, we're making a call back down to the app. It's really going to update a live, in this case, a Postgres database. So the data has been physically changed. We click submit. Whoa, and the viz updated. How cool is that? Well, that's because, again, we could tell the viz to update. We know the data just refreshed, so let's tell the viz, go update, and it does it in place. Notice we didn't have to do a round trip, to the, it's kind of like that single page application type effect where, you don't ever have to do that full round trip and see the browser window completely refresh. So you can create some very elegant effects. Okay, so that's a custom Tableau portal. It's a place where you don't just necessarily embed a viz, although that's fine. That certainly qualifies. But typically it's where the Tableau content is contributing, maybe even a critical part of the overall value proposition, and where you use your creativity, just as you do when you build Tableau vizzes, to build a really cool experience for the users around the Tableau viz by implementing the use cases that are relevant for your portal and that are going to deliver the most value to your customers. Okay, let's switch back. I just want to tee this up because Reed's going to be coming up here to show us some things here in just a second. And I think we've kind of talked through this already, but you might say, well, why embedded analytics? Well, a big one there is the customer experience, right? If we're going to externalize analytics, we pretty much need to do it in an elegant way through a Tableau portal. Monetizing data is huge. And I'm working with, as it happens, another financial services company that just discovered that they're sitting on an $18 million a year business by taking data they already have, anonymizing it, and giving, I think it's called anonymous benchmarking, where they can tell all of their vast number of clients exactly where they stand in their region against peers and so forth, that this data is really valuable. And it's an $18 million a year business, and they're going to realize that through embedded Tableau. Also, if you put analytics where people already go, you'll increase adoption. And that's a good thing because we all want to become more data-driven. Some companies, of course, build their businesses around embedded Tableau, and then with the mobile technology, you can deliver anytime, anywhere. Now, why embed analytics with Tableau? Well, hopefully you're excited about building your portal. A lot of people were nodding your heads or raising hands when we talked about who's maybe interested in doing this. So why would you embed Tableau? Well, we're embedding analytics, so naturally we should embed the best, and I might be a little biased, but I tend to think that's Tableau. And I'll bet you do too, because you're here in New Orleans here at the Tableau conference. There's the time to market value proposition. You'll see how easy it is to embed Tableau. And then lastly, remember the web authoring piece. You can make your consumers of the analytics self-sufficient by exposing web authoring if you so choose. So to get us going, we're going to really drill in on these three key things we talked about: the single sign-on, the REST API for dynamic content, and all sorts of other things, rich user experience through the JavaScript API. So let's go ahead and start building our portal. Reed is going to come up and get us started on that journey.
All right. So thank you, Gordon. To build those three essential features we need to put together that Industrix is requiring: a seamless single sign-on, that dynamic, intuitive menu that navigates our user to the right content, and then also that rich interactivity with that embedded Tableau content. We're going to dive into some development with Tableau servers, APIs, and extensibility. And with what's left of our hour today, we don't have enough time to code up that entire Industrix application from scratch. But what we can show you is how we're going to assemble this from some pre-assembled pieces, something like a toy model. If you ever remember putting these together when you were a kid, I know I loved them very much. What are some of the pieces that we already have going into this? Well, we already have our workbooks and our data sources that have been made in Tableau Desktop. These have been produced by a subject matter expert who knows the analytics questions and answers really well, and they are already hosted up on a Tableau server ready for us to embed. We also already have an idea of what our users are going to need out of that dynamic menu. Maybe we employed a user experience designer to do this, or maybe we did something in-house to figure this out, but we know kind of what the user is going to need to be queued up to get to that right piece of content. Industrix also already has a pre-existing authentication method. We already know who our users are and how we're storing their information and how we prefer to determine whether a user is authentic when they come into our portal. We also have the boilerplate HTML in place. We have some internal web developers who have decided what the look and feel of Industrix needs to be. It's already been implemented for other aspects of the application, and our job with Tableau is to fit into that and match it in look and feel. So the first feature we need to build is our seamless single sign-on. And what we mean by a single sign-on is that the user logs into Industrix, because that's the application they know and are familiar with, and they don't have to be prompted a second time to log into Tableau server. The reason this is important is because it's important not to interrupt that workflow when a user is going into content and they need to be focused on the problems that they're familiar with, but also just keeping that context really consistent for them so that Industrix is always the single application that they're interacting with, and when they get value, they associate that value with Industrix and not with Tableau. What are some of the ways that we're going to usually develop single sign-on for applications? The most common way is trusted authentication. This is what we're going to do in Industrix today, and it's so named because Tableau server has just been configured to trust the Industrix application to authenticate our users for us. An alternative approach that's also very popular is to use a third-party identity provider powered by some technology like SAML or OpenID. In this use case, Industrix is outsourcing their user authentication to a service provided maybe by Okta or Google Authentication. And to work Tableau and to fit Tableau into this, what we do is configure Tableau server to use that same identity provider. That way, when a user logs into one or is authenticated to one or the other, they're mutually authenticated to both. Active Directory is used in a similar way as this, in that it is a third-party identity provider separate from the Tableau server. It's typically, me and Gordon typically see this in internal and on-premise deployments. A little more about why we like trusted authentication so much. We really like trusted authentication because it's really lightweight and it's versatile, and it's easy to use in a lot of different circumstances. It also executes that authentication workflow with just a simple post request from our application server over to our Tableau server. But most importantly, we really like trusted authentication because it leverages the authentication of the application. This means that it's totally wide open and can basically hook into anything. No matter what Industrix had developed to authenticate their users with, we can make Tableau compatible with that because it's a platform agnostic. So let's take a look at how we're going to build that trusted authentication workflow in our Industrix application. All right. So what you're seeing here is the code, is the server-side code of Industrix presented in our internal development environment. And again, I'll reiterate, Tableau's APIs and extensibility are pretty platform agnostic. No matter what you're using to develop that application on your web application server side, Tableau is going to be able to work with it. And everything here we're going to see here is going to be slightly different syntax in different platforms, but the essential operations you'll go through are going to be the same. So right now in Industrix, our trusted authentication is not yet implemented. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when we navigate to this server page. I'll go ahead and save those changes as it is. Well, look at that. I can see Industrix, and I can tell that my user is authentic to Industrix because I can see that we have this logout button here. It doesn't say login, and we're also just able to navigate to this page without being bounced. But in the pane where I would normally expect to see my data visualization, I get a prompt to sign into Tableau server. This is that second login prompt we really want to avoid. We can still see that Tableau's security is still in place and that it's still preventing access to a user who's not authentic, but it's also taking us out of the experience. So, how do we execute this trusted authentication workflow? Well, when that user navigates to that page where they start needing to access some Tableau server resources that require authentication, the first thing they need to do is get that trusted ticket from Tableau server. And the way we're going to do this is by sending that HTTP post request from Industrix's web server over to Tableau's server. Here we have in our code the URL of our Tableau server, and that's appended with we're setting up our request here by informing our platform that it's going to be a post request. And we're appending that URL with and as a part of that request, we're sending over a couple things. We're sending the username And we're also sending this target site, which is the site on Tableau server we need to log this user into. And crucially here, I want to point out, we're not sending any password here or any kind of user credential, because that's what we mean when we say it's a trusted authentication. Industrix has the trust of Tableau server to arbitrarily say this user is authentic. And we've implemented that security because this Industrix's web server has been whitelisted by the Tableau server. So Tableau server only accepts these requests from the server that's running my Industrix application, and it knows it by its host name. So when we send this post request, we're going to get a response back from Tableau server, and that response is going to be a character string. It's going to be an encrypted string, and it's going to be a ticket that's going to be redeemed one time. And I'll show you where we redeem that now. Over here. So when we need to go ahead and pull up our visualization to go ahead and drop into our page when we navigate there, we take that trusted ticket that we received from Tableau server from that post request, and we just put it right in the URL that we're approaching Tableau server with. And when that ticket, and when that request gets to Tableau server, that ticket is redeemed. It can't be used again. And that user then has a session open on Tableau server just as if they had logged into it. So let's go ahead and implement that. And I'll just flip this tag here to go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and run this again. We're resetting the cache here. And that's what that seamless authentication looks like. When my user needs to navigate to this page where they need Tableau server resources, we execute that authentication process for them in our application. And what's great about this is my user is still identified by Tableau server as an individual. So if my user needs individual specific permissions, we can set that all up on Tableau server and they can persist down to our application. And also everything that my user does here is auditable on Tableau server too. So if we want to get reporting on which users are looking at which vises and how much time they're spending with those dashboards and what they're doing, we can all get that out of Tableau server's out-of-box features because we're still authenticating individual users to Tableau server. So that is how we're going to implement trusted authentication. Let me see if I can find the right. There we go. All right. And we're ready to move along to our next feature, which is that dynamic, intuitive content menu. And Gordon's going to come back up and tell us all about that.
Cool. Thank you, Reed. All righty, let's continue our journey here, building a custom Tableau portal with the next piece, building a dynamic content menu. So for this purpose, we're going to use the Tableau REST API. And just to kind of level set, as in what the heck is a REST API anyway? Well, an API is an application programming interface. It's something we can call, possibly with some various functions we can call, possibly with arguments, and then get something back from those calls. When we build a REST API, a couple key characteristics are that you call the REST API using HTTP, the same protocol we use to load web pages. So all the infrastructure is obviously already in place to make REST calls from any point to any other point around the globe. Also, REST APIs themselves look a lot like, REST API calls, I should say, look a lot like URLs because they are, in fact, URLs. So really, it's just an HTTP or HTTPS with some string after it, and we might also be posting, using an HTTP post, some data, meaning arguments or a request, to the URL that represents the function we're calling. So it's very, very simple to interact with. And Tableau's REST API does two primary things. One is it will let us do virtually anything that we could through the Tableau server UI, so we can automate things. Now, why would you want to automate things in the world of building a custom Tableau portal? Turns out it's extremely useful because, for instance, think about maybe onboarding your customers. Most of the folks who build custom Tableau portals have a multi-tenant kind of portal, so it supports multiple distinct customers. And if we happen to be supplying something to both Coke and Pepsi, we sure don't want Coke seeing Pepsi's content or vice versa, just to use an example. And in Tableau, it's easy to set up a multi-tenant environment, and you have a couple vehicles for doing that, sites and projects. Some maybe just projects or a combination of sites and multiple sites and projects. So as you onboard a new customer, do you want to have to go to the Tableau server interface, log in, type in, add new site, and of course not. So you can automate that using the REST API. And likewise, you can onboard users. And that's a very common requirement because in order to do single sign-on, we can, as Reed showed us, as long as we have an authenticated username, we can map that to an authenticated Tableau user transparently without requiring a second logon. But that Tableau user does have to exist. So you might need to just run a little script to make sure that Tableau is populated with that username. And then, of course, we want to secure our content. And the operations that you can perform go on and on and on. This is just a small example. So one big category of using the REST API is automating things. Another is getting data back from Tableau server, just metadata. We're not asking it to do anything, we're asking it to tell us something. And what we want it to tell us when we're about to build a dynamic content menu is, what are the visualizations that this authenticated user has the permission to see? And in our case, what we also do is we ask Tableau server to send us a little thumbnail of the viz. And we take that thumbnail and we put it into the HTML along with a link to the viz. And that's how we build, in this particular portal, the custom menu. So let's go ahead and look at what's involved in putting together a custom menu for your Tableau portal. And we're going to jump back here to Industrix, which you have actually already seen a little bit here. This is the self-service analytics menu that we looked at earlier. And by the way, just to kind of drive home the point that you don't have to do things this way. You know, this is the kind of grab some thumbnails, put them in the HTML, let the user click through to the embedded visualization. I also had up here another demo portal. This is a fictitious hospital health portal. And by default, when you log in, you immediately see this central visualization. And by the way, they've got a cool use case. They do all of their filtering outside the visualization. Just another thing you could potentially do with the JavaScript API. Oh, yeah, okay. I have this page has been sitting here for a while, so my session timed out. But as you see, we filter programmatically through these buttons across the top. And here's this portal's dynamic content menu. Completely different. It's a drop-down list. So maybe we want to go to the invoice performance metrics over to patient satisfaction. That's a different visualization, but again, this is a dynamic content menu. This is a dynamic content menu. However you choose to do it is entirely up to you. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we put all this together. Oops, actually I just want to... The toughest part of this, as you probably have gathered, of the whole session is figuring out which button to press and when down there on the little KVM switch. Okay, so as Reed pointed out, we happen to have here a little bit of Java code because we got to pick a language. We have to be using good old Apache Tomcat, one of the most widely used standard kind of web servers out there. That's kind of the technology stack here. But we will support whatever, essentially any language that you might choose to use in any web platform you might want to build your portal on. I guess we chose Java because we're all here. At least today, we need to consume a lot of Java to make it to this point at conference, so why not just go with Java for the programming language too. In fact, our username is even called Joe. Gosh, you can't beat it. But okay, so here's again where we were doing the trusted tickets. And by the way, there's the trusted ticket. It's kind of like there's one of those things in the wild. If you haven't seen a trusted ticket, it's that crazy string. That's what we got back from Tableau server. And we inserted it into the URL, and we put that into the page that the user had access to. All they had to do was click on it, and boom, they get access to the viz. And now we want to make sure that our user, our customer, our supplier, our partner, whoever is using the portal, can dynamically discover the content that's available to him or to her. And again, for that purpose, we're going to use the REST API. Now, when you use the REST API, there are basically two key things that you do. One is that you sign on to the REST API. We need to make a call to get back, in this case, it's not a trusted ticket. It is a funny looking string, but it's not a trusted ticket. It is a security token that says that we have authenticated to the REST API. And when you use the REST API, naturally, there are some calls that only administrators can make. There's some calls that site admins can make. And there's some calls that any ordinary user could make. So naturally, the REST API is secure, so we have to authenticate to it. So it can determine what we're allowed to call and what information we're allowed to retrieve or actions we're allowed to perform. And this also gives us an opportunity to, if you haven't worked with a REST API, just to briefly highlight what the kind of the transaction or what the process looks like. In this case, when we log in, we send a data to the call, and it's called a TS request. This is an initial XML element here. So we're building a little small XML document. And essentially all we're doing here is we're saying, here's who we are, here's our password, and here's the site that we'd like to log into. Again, sites are kind of these silos in Tableau. There are Chinese walls, so to speak, between sites. So if we're going to perform operations, we need to be very specific about in which site we're performing them. And of course, Tableau will validate that we have the permission even to do that. So we need to specify the site, unless it's the default site. And so we build up this little request, and then we said that really calling a REST API is no more than a URL. So we build the URL that we want to point to, and we then do an HTTP post, and we send that off to Tableau server, and we get back a security token. So now we're ready to start making all the calls. Well, what calls do we have to make? Well, we need to retrieve the thumbnails. So there are a couple ways that we could do that. We could go back, you saw sort of the line-by-line code there a second where we build up an HTTP request. So whatever your language, I'm sure, supports a means of making an HTTP request. There's a way to kind of do it by hand. Build the XML, send it off, then get the XML back as a string, and then process it. That's what you would do, or it might be JSON, the other format common with REST APIs. So you could take that approach, but it turns out that for the Tableau REST API, there are a number of client libraries out there. There's one from Tableau, and then there's the best, really, out there, was written by a colleague of Reed's and mine, and he goes by the name of Brian Howells. Anybody know Brian Howells' blog or has talked to Brian? Yep, there's Dan. Yeah, a couple of folks. He's just an incredibly sharp guy, and he built this really robust library in Python, and it just encapsulates the whole REST API. So you can just make simple calls that might, behind the scenes, take several steps to get done, and it saves you a ton of time. I'm using a lightweight Java one. It's not anywhere near as strong as Brian's, but it sort of shows that, yes, you can also, we can hide all that code or work we'd have to do with the REST API behind a simple function call, even using a very basic library. And in this case, what we do is we go get the workbooks. And we're passing in a username, so we will only get the ones that user is authenticated or allowed to see. And by the way, the source code here you will have access to. So I know there's always a little bit of a problem with, I would say that doing code during a session can be a little problematic because you have to go through it at a certain pace because we only have an hour, and then you're kind of, just as you're starting to read what's in that one line of code, we flip to another section of it. So to make sure that isn't a challenge or an issue, we will be sharing all of this over Dropbox. And you could even take the code and put it on Apache Tomcat, spin up your own portal. Because there is a config file where you just specify the server you're pointing to, the Tableau server, the web server, the username, the password, and you're good to go. So you can have your own custom Tableau portal literally in minutes. And what we do in the code, you might have noticed, is everywhere where we're doing one of the things we're talking about today, SSO, dynamic menu, there's a little recipe, some tips about how you could go about doing it. And that, again, would hopefully save you some time and a little bit of effort in building your own. So we get the workbooks, and we then get the views, because we can publish multiple views in a single workbook. As we saw just earlier where we had two, and we could swap back and forth between them in the JavaScript API. And so we just get basically the views that are out there, and notice that Tableau provides this handy, just go out there, and it's called a view icon. And we just say, hey, can you give us back the icon for this viz? We write it to disk, and then pop the URL into the HTML. That's it. So let's kind of take an inventory here. Reed maybe showed us about 15 or so lines of code, something along that nature. Here's another, I don't know, along with maybe getting the token, which we could actually do through the library. I just kind of wanted to show you how to interact with the REST API by hand. That might take another 15. So let's say we're up to 50 lines of code and 2/3 of the portal is already done. That's the value proposition of time to effort. So basically the last step here is to put those thumbnails into the HTML. So we just loop through them. And then we get this tremendous effect here. And it is dynamic, by the way. I'm going to log out. I'm going to log back in as Rosie, who is a different user. Now, if you notice, there were 5 visits that came back for Joe. We log in as Rosie and go to the Self-Service Analytics menu, and we see 4 because they're allowed to see different sets of visits. It truly is dynamic, and it truly respects all of the security that we've configured in our Tableau server. So the last thing we really want to do is the fun part, and that's the embedded viz itself. So we're going to switch back to Reed here, and Reed is going to take us through the home stretch. One housekeeping note, we'll probably be able to stick around for maybe a couple minutes, but I think just about everyone in this room is probably going to be running to the airport, unfortunately, after today's session, so we won't be able to stick around a long time. But I'm G. Rose at Tableau, and Reed is R. Walton at Tableau.com, and if you have questions or there's something we can help you with later, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you.
All right. All right, thank you. So now we have these 2 essential pieces in place. We've got that single sign-on in place, and we've got our dynamic menu in place, and now we got to build that interactivity with that Tableau content. That's really the bread and butter, the experience that Industrix is trying to provide to its users. So to talk again about what we do when we embed dashboards into portals with Tableau. What you see here is something like what we have seen in Industrix, where we have this credit card loyalty points dashboard, and that's in that white rectangle there. And then all around the outside of that is all the website. So we've got some buttons along the top, and we got some menu bars there. And the important thing to know kind of about how this is always going to work when we embed dashboards from Tableau is that the dashboard is in an iframe. And so we have, rather than a typical web application where there's a single server providing functionality, we now have 2 different servers that are teaming up to provide the functionality here. We've got a web server that's providing the application itself, so that's serving up Industrix. And then we've also got the Tableau server, which is doing sort of similar functionality to render that Tableau content as users interact with it. So in order to make those 2 servers work together to build the experience we want, we need to use our JavaScript API to facilitate that kind of back and forth communication that those 2 servers are going to need to have. And so to dive a little bit into a couple of the features that Gordon had demoed to us earlier, when a user selects the export worksheet data on the Industrix portal and they do all that stuff, that's all functionality that's facilitated by Industrix over on its web server. And when Tableau server needs to respond by sending out our CSV file of that exported data, well, we need to communicate to Tableau server to have that interaction happen. We also need to listen to and respond to events that are happening in the Tableau content so that our Industrix server can respond. So an example of this was this feature of selecting marks on a visualization. So if a user needs to perform some function like identifying outliers on a scatter plot and select those marks to kind of deliver that answer, and then the application needs to respond. Maybe after selecting marks, we're going to stick them in an email and send them, or maybe after selecting our marks, there's any kind of other functionality we need to use that data to support. Well, we need to pass that instruction down on to our portal. So when a user selects marks here, we need to have the functionality to know what they did and get the metadata about what they did so we can respond accordingly. Embedding itself with the JavaScript API is really easy. It's not really more difficult than just grabbing that embedded snippet and dropping it into a web page. If you go on to our Tableau website, there's a great JavaScript API tutorial. Step 1 is a snippet just like this, and this is really all you need to get a visualization embedded. You can do a lot more with it, but really to get started, it's just an essential function like this. So we're going to start there in the code of our Industrix portal, and we're going to talk about how we build our JavaScript API interactivity. All right. All right, so first of all, we're going to start off with just this empty div. When we first load up our page from Industrix, all we have is an empty space where our dashboard is going to go. So we've already got everything except the dashboard kind of already in place. And when we send our first instruction to our Tableau server is going to be to take that div and populate it with our dashboard. So what we're doing here is establishing in our JavaScript this div is that empty div there. It had that identifier, or it had the identifier viz. So we're going to grab that object out of our object model. And then we're going to establish a couple of options here we're going to want to load our dashboard up with. There are things like whether or not to hide the tabs or hide the toolbar. There's really a lot of stuff we can do with this options array. We can do things like start off our viz with a set of filters and parameters we want to initially load our visualization up with, if that's something we need to have seamless and dynamic. And really a lot of other stuff. And also critically here, we're specifying another function further down in our JavaScript to execute when this viz is initially loaded. And then essentially, here is where we're actually doing the work of grabbing that viz from Tableau server. So here we have we're establishing this viz object in our JavaScript. Our JavaScript API is a little bit different than our REST API because the REST API is all about those URL endpoints, and those are kind of the units of functionality in that API. In the JavaScript API, we have more like a library of JavaScript functions, and they're object-oriented. So this viz object is kind of what we start with, and we have certain functions we're able to execute against that viz that are provided by Tableau to do specific things for us. And then we have some other objects downstream that we're also going to work with. So for example, clearing selections. If we want an automatic way to just clear all selections, if there are multiple different things that a user's been using in a dashboard and we just need a seamless way to just clear those all out without having to have them manually click around on the dashboard. We're going to start with that viz object, and then we're going to query down. So from that viz object, we've queried to get the workbook object, and then we're going to get the active sheet from that object. And then from the worksheets in that object, we're going to go ahead and iterate through all those sheets, and we're going to execute this function, clear selected marks. It's pretty organically designed, and so that all of the methods follow along for the objects that they apply to. And to get into the listening to response of that mark selection, which is really some rich functionality, we have this event listener. So once we've established this viz object, we go ahead and once we've completed the load, we want to add this event listener to that object. And what we're doing here with this event listener is we're creating the capacity in our web application to know when certain things happen on the Tableau server side. So what we're saying here is from that Tableau server, when any user selects any marks, so on mark selection, and we can also do things like when a user changes a filter or when a user selects a header or other actions like that, we can specify another function in our JavaScript to run. And in this case, we're running this on mark selection function. In that mark selection function is where we're going to stick our event. So we get this event back from Tableau server. And what that's got in it is all the metadata from that event. What the user clicked on, which marks, metadata about those marks, and also all the tuples of data that are associated with those marks in the visualization. So if there's something like click on a mark on a scatter plot that's just a dot, you can also get any kind of data that you have on that detail shelf in Tableau. You'll get those little bits of data back if that's important metadata you need to send on to other functionality in your application. And in our case, what we're doing is we're pulling up our interface that's just going to show us how to do that. So to demo again, what we're doing when we select things on our viz, Here, Tableau has responded by saying we've selected some orders. What happened there is, after I selected marks, that was an action that was known to Tableau server. By the way I specified the API in my JavaScript, I knew to listen to that event, and Tableau server told me this event happened. And then elsewhere in my JavaScript, I also have my response, which was designed completely by my web developers, which was report those marks that were selected, and maybe some aggregates or other metadata that are about those. And then also I just have this easy clear selections button. This functionality needs to work the way it's designed in my viz according to sort of how that functionality rolls up. I think there's really a wide open array of different interactions that we can build and different workflows we can build out of these interactions. I think one way that a lot of people like to think about the JavaScript API is that it's like an automatic user. If your users are doing some things in Industrix and they're doing some things in a dashboard, but they need like some help from your application side. You know, I wish it were easier to do this or that, or I wish a set of actions were to be orchestrated in bulk to happen when I take a single action in one or the other. That's what the JavaScript API can really provide, is sort of a virtual user of the Tableau dashboard that can be kind of an automated user alongside your user as they're getting answers to analytics questions out of that content. So that is our portal. We've got a user can come to Industrix, they can log in, they can be authenticated, they get navigated down to, they get cues to navigate them to the right piece of content they need to do, and then once they're working with analytics questions, they can have this back and forth where all their answers can be mutual between those two web servers. There we go. All right. So that's our session today. There's a couple other things I think I really recommend you check out. All this developer track content, there's a lot of subject matter there between the different APIs and different techniques and utilities that might be employed to build portals like this. So there's lots of great resources there. I always recommend checking it out. I also really want to plug our developer program. That's going to be a great way to go ahead and take those next steps of getting more resources. And if you want to go along and start looking at how to develop some of these portals, you're going to see things there like code examples and utilities. And also a great place to get resources like that is going to be Tableau's official GitHub. On that GitHub page are all the things that our developers just released to the community. So things like utilities or code examples or the libraries that they build on top of these APIs that help users get what they need out of them. There's lots of great stuff there. It's really a wealth of content. I really recommend checking it out. Also, please give us great ratings on the app. We're going to get fired if you don't rate us all 5s. And I think we have time for questions. Let's see, how much time do we have? We got 2 minutes for questions. Who's got a quick one? Non-licensed Tableau users? Well, if your server is licensed by Core, you can use a functionality called a guest user. Non-licensed Tableau users aren't really, the only thing a non-licensed user could really get out of Tableau under the terms of our license agreement would be static content. So exporting, a static image of a report, that's allowed, but interactivity falls under our licensing. So they would have to be licensed. If you would need to be a Tableau server user if your Tableau server is a user-based license, yes, in order to interact with that content.
So we do have core license, but the example that you've given is authenticating the user through the single sign-on. Does it have to be the user, or can we use the service account also? In case we don't want to figure out what the user is clicking on, all we need to do is, because we do have core license, but we don't want to manage the sync and all, is it possible to use the service account?
The question was, is it possible to use a service account to do this functionality if you don't want to manage your individual users on your Tableau server. And in the case that your server is core licensed, that is covered under our licensing agreement. So you can have a single user if your server is licensed by core. We also have a functionality that's specifically for a guest user if you wanted like demo content. Personally, I'll add from our experience consulting a lot is that that's not a great approach because the two key limitations there are that you don't get those individual level permissions and you also don't get the individual level auditing and reporting. So most people opt to include that as an aspect of their workflow. But yes, if you are licensing by core, there are ways to implement that.
One per server, whereas
Yes.
the account can have multiple servers.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
On the trusted authentication method, where are the users defined? Are they only on the Tableau server or they are from someone else? Because I got confused between this method and the OpenID and Tableau method.
The question is, where are the users managed in the case of trusted authentication? And the answer is that they're managed in both places. So in this case, Industrix has users that it knows who they are, and it also is managing their credentials. So when a user logs in, their username and password is evaluated against Industrix's user authentication. And then when we want to log that user over to Tableau, we have an equivalent user managed by Tableau. So Tableau server has been configured now to use local authentication. Yes. And I will say also a lot of our clients automate that. It'll be done through our REST API as well, is when a user signs up in Industrix, and then maybe an administrator flips that flag, yes, this user is real, then you have a REST API script that goes and adds that user to the right groups on server where they get the right permissions and so forth.
It's an automated sync process that is there, right? I went to another class, they said that there's a sync process that you can schedule the users of
Depending on which authentication systems you're syncing up with, there are cases where we can sync up those users. I think in a lot of cases that's with Active Directory. You can sync those users up with that Active Directory.
Because the customer portal and you're managing authentication either like Google Sync or however, where's the authorization managed? Is it all on the Tableau side or Industrix on both?
Tableau server is being used to do all our authorization for for the Tableau stuff. So saying like when a user logs in, getting to like which Tableau content they have permission to see, and then like what permissions they have within that content, like whether or not they're allowed to see the underlying data or permissions like that. We're leveraging Tableau's authorization to do all that functionality. So all that's going to be the same as if you were using Tableau server out of the box on the Tableau side. Yeah, like whether or not to expose like Tableau in general on the site, yeah. I would keep an eye on emails. I think those will probably come through the marketing channel. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we got to hustle out of the room, but thank you all so much for coming.